There's a difference between being certain you're right and being incapable of discovering you're wrong. That's a distinction we don't make very often anymore. Because changing your mind looks weak. Politicians get called flip-floppers. Online, admitting you were wrong means somebody gets a screenshot. So we've created an environment where defending yesterday's conclusion can be safer than acknowledging today's evidence. This week, Robby and I ask a pretty simple question. What would change your mind? And if your answer is nothing, that's probably more interesting than whatever you believe. This is Shrink the Nation. Let's go. This is Shrink the Nation, a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably holding a drink and definitely holding a thought. The views expressed here are ours alone. They do not represent our employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or most emphatically, our families. They've been very clear about that. This show is for education and entertainment only. Nothing you hear is medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. We're clinicians, not your clinicians. If something we say stirs you up, that's not a crisis, that's a journal entry, or an email sent politely. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers on the internet. And if you are in real distress, please reach out to a professional who can actually help you. All right, hey, this is David. Welcome back. I am a board-certified psychiatrist. I have over 20 years in the military. And today, I am sharing a drink with my good friend, Rob. We're sitting in the same room. This is awesome. I think it's going to be a nightmare to edit the sound, but I'm still looking forward to it. I'm going to let Rob introduce himself, and then we're going to talk about bourbon because that seems to be the right way to do this today.
Yeah. Hey, guys. It's Rob, 30 years military experience, 26, going on 27 years in psychiatry and board certified. And if you haven't picked it up, David and I are actually sitting in the same room for once with a frightening number of bourbons.
Yeah, very much. Lots of bourbon. This is actually the second time we sat in the same room, but this is the first time I think we're going to do it with this much bourbon. And we have a selection. So we're just going to just announce them as we go because I think that's the easiest way. Now, typically, I just pour. I don't measure. I don't do anything other than just throw it into the glass and see what happens. We're going to do a shot of each of these as we go along, so at least we can keep track. And the medical examiner will have some audio of what ended up happening to these two.
I appreciate your caution. You're absolutely right. Let's be scientific about this.
That's what we're going to do. We're starting today with Puncher's Chance, the undisputed single barrel Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. This one I just got today as a gift before we recorded. So that was really nice. Thank you. It's 108 proof. It is apparently a blend of 5 and 6-year-old bourbons from a high rye mash bill. So my first taste of it so far is it's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
It does clean.
So it's definitely rye.
Spicy.
It's got some spice to it. Usually I do bourbon neat, and this has been sitting in a glass with an ice cube for a bit. So the 108 proof doesn't jump out at me as it probably would if it was neat. However, it's a good bourbon.
We don't have to get you any more. I get you a nice...
We have a proper round cube. It's lovely. No. For our purposes, I think this is probably smarter than...
Yeah. I'm pouring it into a shot glass and just dividing it up appropriately. So we're each getting a shot. We'll see how it goes. To our tens of listeners, cheers. I'm using the Shrink Responsibly rocks glass. Rob's got the old-fashioned values rocks glass there.
Exactly. I'm anti-Nazi, anti-rape, and anti-murder. Call me old-fashioned.
That's the message, but you can pick those up on our website at shrinkthenation.com. Since we're just sitting here, you and I, we're riffing. I had this idea for an episode after listening to another podcast that I really like, and it was an interview with Senator Fetterman. 90% of the way that the man votes is with the Democratic Party or whatever. What got this going wasn't about his politics as much as his perspective on Israel. And what I found kind of frustrating to listen to as he was talking is just the fact that when presented with facts, or at least alternative perspectives to his belief structure, he refused to back down from his stance. And I found that fascinating for a guy who is in the position that he's in to be unwilling to give any ground whatsoever on that perspective. And that's where I thought, hey, let's take this episode today.
Yeah. So there's a temptation when you're faced with someone who just will not listen to facts to think that they're delusional. But we also have to factor in that he may have been lying. He may have sincerely disagreed. He may have such a constituency that he believes that's what they want to hear. He may have other ideas about the stability or the security situation in the Middle East that causes him to go that direction. But it is interesting to watch facts bounce off without any adjustment in stance, or fundamentally an adjustment even in the way they're presenting their stance, which is interesting.
What really strikes me with him in particular is that, for backstory for our tens of listeners, Senator Fetterman is from Pennsylvania and he is a Democrat, but he gets a lot of flack for voting in ways that really benefit MAGA, particularly on topics related to Israel. He is very much a supporter of Israel. I think it would be difficult to call him anything but. What I find fascinating about his stance is that he's very aware in his communities that his stance on Israel is likely to cost him in the next election. The big problem that he has right now is that he's going to have a hard time running as anything but a Democrat, but he's really pissed off the Democrats because he's given so much power to MAGA and Trump in the way that he votes. But his hardline stance is that, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'm going to get fact checked on this later. If you don't support Israel, you are being anti-Semitic. If you are supporting Palestine in any way, shape, or form, you are supporting Hamas, and that's it. When faced with somebody saying, well, I support Palestine, I don't support Hamas, I support Jews, I'm okay with most of the people in Israel. What I don't support is perpetuating a genocide against the Palestinian people. I think Israel has the right to defend themselves against Hamas, certainly, but I don't think they have the right to attack Palestinians. And there are Israeli settlers who are attacking Palestinians in their home. Just this last week, there were 14 people in 3 different households, one of them owned by an American, that the U.S. had to step in because they were blockading them in their homes. That's not okay. We should be able to call them out. And he can separate Israel from the settlers, but he can't separate Palestine from Hamas. It's political suicide on his part to take that stance, and yet he continues to do it.
So I guess it makes me think about certainty. So the opposite of certainty isn't necessarily uncertainty. It's maybe more revisability. So like I can be 98% certain of something and still maintain a certain intellectual honesty, knowing that there would be something that would reduce my certainty. There might be a fact that comes into my knowledge that would reduce me to, say, 80% certainty. You could also be 70% certain of the factual information that you have, but be 100% unable to revise your stance. So you're of the position that there is no conceivable evidence that can be presented that would make you revise. And I guess that's what you're seeing there. The argument you just made, I concur with. It's kind of like saying, if I criticize Italy, I'm anti-Catholic. Bottom line is you can question a country's actions without necessarily criticizing the religious makeup of that country. However, right now, in particular, it is tightly bound. And it's particularly tightly bound, I think, in the younger demographic of the Democratic Party. It seems to be a particularly salient issue. And the reason I know this is from talking to my boys. Apparently, this is a big thing on TikTok.
Where I go to all my news too, TikTok.
Well, that's where they get a lot of their information, and they have very firmly held negative perspectives on Israel. But in talking to them, they speak in terms of the religion. And so these are conversations they and I have had that slow your roll there, boys. Mm-hmm. We're not talking Jewish people. We're talking Netanyahu's administration of Israel as a country. So it's out there. And you do make a good point. Earlier, I said maybe it's his constituency. No, this is not benefiting him from an electoral standpoint. It does make me question maybe he doesn't want to do the job anymore. He seems to be a very reluctant senator, interestingly enough.
When you listen to him talk, he tries to frame it from the perspective of anybody who supports Palestine supports Hamas. Anybody who is not for this war with Iran wants them to have a nuclear weapon. And when somebody can say, no, I don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, but I don't think this is the way to go about doing that, he really shuts down from there. I think he is filling a hole that was left when Manchin and Sinema left the Senate, in that Name 10 other Democratic senators at this point. I don't know that most people could. I don't know that I could. So this is probably helpful to raise his profile in some way, even if it isn't helpful to get him reelected, although he might get reelected. They might very much like him. We see that all the time. Lindsey Graham was all over the place, even with Trump, and yet he kept getting reelected. Hell, his sister, having served 0 in the Senate, maybe 0.1 at this point, she's probably going to get elected to his seat.
Name recognition alone.
Yeah. Maybe that plays a bigger role. I'm not sure, but it's frustrating and it's fascinating. It's like, how does somebody operate this way?
Well,
I don't know the answer to it.
I guess fundamentally what we like to believe is that we are all rational players, that we come into this with a certain intellectual honesty, and we have some sense of what it would require for us to conclude that we're wrong and that we would revise our opinion. But what we consistently see, if you scroll back into our prior episodes, we've touched on this in so many different ways, but there is a certain resistance to falsifiability that we see across the board in politics in general. And that makes sense. We've talked about it from different angles. Their guy is accused of a sex scandal, and they're the worst. They're supporting this horrible human. There's no excuse for it. And then the next week comes along and my guy gets accused of that. Now all of a sudden I'm like, well, people lie and all the evidence isn't in yet. So this fluctuating level of evidence required for falsifiability is something we see quite frequently. What we're arguing across the board is that in order to be intellectually honest, it's okay to be confident in your opinion, to have confidence that you're correct, but to be intellectually honest, you do have to hold back that there is something out there that would falsify your opinion and you would revise it potentially.
And I wonder how much of it is because that person's opinion cannot be changed just because they're not able to change it. Like, I just believe this so much to such a deep level that no matter what you say, it can't be changed. Or in the case of like a senator, you're playing that media perspective so well that I'm not going to get caught saying something on camera, some hot take that can be used against me later to say that I'm either flip-flopping or that I'm a liar or whatever. Like how much of, and I wonder how much of that plays a role, because I think when you're talking about somebody whose deeply held beliefs cannot be changed, and I'm not going to suggest delusion, which is a psychiatric thing, but for somebody who just believes this to their core to the point where there is nothing that can be said, that's different. But for somebody who just says, I know that my stance cannot be anything but this because I have to save face or I have to maintain this position because that's what I ran on or that's what I'm going to run on. I feel like there probably is. And I think that's where that comes into the intellectual dishonesty category.
Potentially. What we're also hitting on is that there are a lot of forces on these individuals in terms of their opinion. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus here as an example of drifting into being maybe immovable in an opinion. So many moons ago, I walked into a command position and I knew I was going to be faced with some difficult decisions. So my goal was to be internally consistent. And that led me to kind of come up with basically some of my initial command decisions. I developed a heuristic on how I was going to make these calls. And I would say my first few calls were really good. The problem is that as time passed, I had developed this decisional heuristic, and problems tend to only loosely resemble one another. They get more complex and they don't always fit. They don't necessarily sit in the same places. But because I was so dead set on being consistent, I drifted into maybe being immovable at a certain point. And thankfully, I had good people around me who, in a very command appropriate way, devil's advocate. So it could be that too, that you start off, you're running for a political office. Your goal is to just be honest and be internally consistent. But over time, the facts change, but what you have already established, you're hesitant to drift away from. So that's possible. They also have the force of their political party, their constituency, the camera that's acting on them in different ways. So all those things are going to affect them. And as a politician, being a flip-flopper is a dirty word. So with Fetterman specifically, I'm not sure which one of those things are at play. And maybe all the above. I don't know enough about him, so I have to say, I'm right now I'm sitting here highly accepting that I can be falsified very easily. But I don't know if he started off his political path being a diehard supporter of Israel, and he just can't back away from it.
Yeah, I don't know that you and I can answer that question, give a clear diagnosis of whatever is going on with John. What I actually would be really interested in is if any of our attentive listeners have had experiences with other people or themselves, like you just described, where you went into something with a set perspective and then either caught yourself sticking to it when maybe you shouldn't have, or actually being willing to adjust your viewpoint. It's always, I think it's always really interesting to see how people, if they can identify that in themselves, because you and I have both seen this through our careers, is that whenever a patient tells me a story about a perspective, I go into it thinking they have half the perspective. They're half right. And so I think that protects me as a therapist from jumping too much on their side. I do care about them. I am supportive of them, but I also know that whatever they're telling me is just one piece of the story.
You know, that's an interesting angle, actually, because in our line of work, when we sit with patients, one of the things we're called upon to do is to develop a model for this patient's personality structure, their psychodynamics, what drives them. And I know certainly in my career, which now extends out to closing in on 3 decades, there have been many instances in which I have developed a model to help this individual, their childhood experiences, how it impacts them, how it plays into their decision making, the recurrence of, say, certain relational patterns, etc. And then something will happen. And I believe very firmly that my model is correct, and it's played out over and over again over time. I know you see a patient 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Over time, it has played out. And then something happens that is a complete outlier, and it just doesn't fit with the model. My gut instinct is to go the pseudoscience route and do some ad hoc explanation to account for it, so that my model has not been falsified. And I have gone down that road in some cases. And then usually something else happens and something else happens. And I realize, okay, the model was it was shit to begin with. It worked up to a point and now it doesn't work anymore. So maintaining that falsifiability. Hey, everyone out in the audience, prepare to drink. Because I do have a quote, because I just thought of a quote, one of my favorites, and this is by Oliver Cromwell. The short quote that you might hear occasionally is, think it possible you may be mistaken. That basically saying, hey, you should always remind yourself you can be wrong. All right. Now, the long quote is so much better. He was marching an army into Scotland when he said this, but he said, I beseech you, in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you might be mistaken. That's visceral right there. So I think that earns 2 drinks, actually.
I agree. I like the quote.
In the bowels of Christ. That might be my new curse that I just toss out when my boys do something stupid.
Actually, I'm going to start using that, I think. I feel like I should. All right, so second pour. Because we're doing this together, I just poured a Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. That's 45.2% alcohol, so 90.4 proof Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey, finished in a second oak barrel.
So in theory, it should give it more character. There should be more hints of vanilla and whatever chocolate, sometimes people will say, which always cracks me up because it seems like both ends of the spectrum. You can smell it.
It almost has a maple smell.
It almost has a maple smell. There's a difference.
That's striking. What always weirded me out about Woodford Reserve is that it's one of the options that you can get on American Airlines in a small bottle. And so I've had so much Woodford Reserve on airplanes that it feels lowbrow. When you're riding on American Airlines and you get an upgraded seat or whatever, the random upgrade in there, and you get a couple of bottles of these, you aren't feeling fancy.
Aren't they adorable, though?
They really are. And that's where I've had the vast majority of my Woodford Reserve. So I rarely actually have a bottle because it's so expensive compared to other bourbons. And frankly, I've got enough other bourbon to drink that I don't need to buy a $60 bottle. I did not purchase this bottle. This was a gift as well. So I'm trying to go through the bottles that are gifts, which I think most of them are at this point. To our tens of listeners, by all means, send us bottles of bourbon. I'm happy to.
Or distilleries?
Yeah, we'll happily do it. It's nice. It finishes better than a typical Woodford. I do like the double oaked. I'm not going to lie. I hate it when I like bourbons that are really expensive, though. That pisses me off.
I know.
Can't Jim Beam put out some like $8 bottle of just top notch? Come on, guys. It's not that expensive to make this shit.
Well, material wise, no. And the cost they have in a bottle, each one of these companies have about the same amount of cost. So you're buying for the prestige and I guess the flavor. But this one definitely, for our tens of listeners, if you're interested in bourbons, this one definitely has a lot of other flavor points. I'm going to say it's much more oaky, but that doesn't say much because it's double oaked. I'm an expert taster apparently, but it does have a little more character. It's technically a rye, but it's not really a high rye. So you don't have as much spiciness. So there's a little bit more smoothness on the back end.
I'd hate to say it's almost cleaner than the other one that we had so far.
Cleaner. Okay.
But it's nice. It finishes really nice. It's lovely bourbon. I think I'll come back to this one at some point. All right. There was another story that came out this week that just happened to work beautifully into this topic. Basically, Trump ordered the Navy through an executive order to do a lot of things. I don't want to simplify the executive order down to just this one thing, but this was in there and it was important. But essentially come up with a plan to change on future Ford-class carriers, the EMALS system, electromagnetic aircraft launch system, to change from that back to a steam-based catapult system. So this was Reuters that brought this up, and I think maybe the New York Times. This isn't something that was just made up, but there was an executive order with a lot of demands of the Navy, or I guess the DoD, or the DOW, whatever. Now, the reason that this jumped out at me, other than my time in the Navy, my time in the Air Force, was that the Ford-class carriers were actually designed, and again, I'm going to get fact-checked for sure. Go to our website, shrinkthenation.com. Go to fact-checked. I'm certain I will be fact-checked on this. There will be some nuance to what I just said that's wrong, but these carriers were designed around eliminating the steam catapult systems because there's a lot of problems with them. They are reliable. They've been battle-tested. They've been around since the 70s, so we know they work. But we have a supply chain that can fix them. There are obviously still carriers in existence that use these systems. It's not that they're bad per se. It's that they design these aircraft carriers around eliminating the problems that exist with that and moving towards a future. And it's not just this digital future of catapults. It's not like, well, it's electric, therefore it's better. No, there are some reasons that you would want an electromagnetic system because you're not launching the same aircraft off of these carriers. You're launching a lot of unmanned aircraft that don't require that much power. And so there's a lot of wear and tear that goes onto an aircraft when you use a launching system. I personally have never launched off an aircraft carrier, and I've never landed on an aircraft carrier. But the gist of it, and in fact, check the shit out of me, stupid AI, is that you have your aircraft sitting there, you basically power up as much as possible, and the thing launches you forward to create enough drag and lift that you can, with your thrusters fully going, get in the air. Well, different sized aircraft have different requirements, but a steam system is going to basically launch you the same or similar each time. And that creates just so much stress on the aircraft. So when you're using a lot more unmanned aircraft that just don't have as much weight, that's a lot of potential damage to them. So having an electromagnetic system allows you to modify the speed and thrust and power, all the stuff that you would need to get different aircraft into the air. So it actually expands what you can put on the aircraft carrier and changes what the aircraft carrier can do in different situations. Trump has a point. I'm not going to say he doesn't, because the EMALS system has had a lot of problems over the last decade. But if we go back to 2017, when he first started complaining about this and wanting steam, his position hasn't really changed, even though the EMALS system now has tens of thousands of sorties that it's been used for. And so it is not perfect. In fact, it is deeply flawed, but it has improved over the last decade. And that's where we get to, is his stance hasn't changed in spite of the fact that EMALS has. And just for a perspective for our tens of users, because these aircraft carriers were designed with EMALS in mind, they just don't have the things that other aircraft carriers have that can support a steam system. You need steam lines, fresh water systems to create the steam. You can't just heat up seawater. You have a lot of salt and shit and welcome. And they're like, you got to be able to heat up the water to be able to create the steam. Like there's just a lot that goes into building steam systems to redesign these new carriers with old systems in place is going to cost a lot. It's going to be very expensive and it's going to create major redesigns. Not to mention they are very personnel intensive. So there's just a lot that goes into this. That's discussion for a different podcast. But Rob, looking at this for a psychiatrist, why is it so fascinating that Donald Trump is holding on to a position that's 9 years old?
Why does it fascinate me? Well, one, I'm not asking to be fact checked on this because I am purely speculating, but I am going to bet that Ronnie Jackson, who probably also was never launched or landed on a carrier, but was a Navy guy, when he was the White House physician, was complaining about the EMALS system, and that somehow seeped into Donald Trump's consciousness and what we were just talking about, the certainty versus revisability. Our POTUS is interesting in the fact that once he locks in to certain opinions, whether it be, I don't know, windmills or
That's exactly what I thought of when I saw this. That was 100% where my mind went, was his weird distaste and mistrust of wind power and railing on wind power and then talking about steam. But I'll be honest, that's not the direction that we probably should go in because it's kind of a non sequitur to this conversation. But at the same time, or tens of listeners, I'd be fucking shocked if they weren't also thinking, yeah, the guy fucking hates wind power for some reason too.
Or vaccinations now.
Well, that's new though. Come on, that's new. The vaccination thing is new. Like that's not old because people of his generation like lined up to get injected with shit because they knew it was going to save them. So that's new. I don't know. Those aren't the same.
But it's an example of a low information stimulus that ends up creating a level of certainty in him that is also then non-revisable. You cannot talk him out of these things now. There's no amount of evidence that would render this falsifiable. And that's what's funny. I find it interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, why is this an executive order to begin with? That seems interesting to me or fascinating to me because there are lots of internal processes that the United States Navy, Army, Air Force, etc. This is an internal issue among them. You solve things at the level that you have the capability of solving. And if they can't solve it, then they say, all right, we can't solve this. And then you go to higher. There's been like 40,000 EMALS launches and since
Right.
By March of this year, there were like 40,000 launches. It's not like it's a wasted system. And you're absolutely right. These ships were built around it. There's a reason why they were built around it. It's the future.
It saves the maintenance costs. Less personnel manning. I mean,
apparently they also, there's a limit to how many craft you can launch with steam without regenerating the steam.
Well, I can just tell you when I was in the Navy, you'd hear these horror stories about having a leak in one of the steam valves and it just like cutting people in half and shit.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that was real, but it scared the shit out of me enough that I was like, I don't want to be on the carrier.
Yeah.
I went on the USS Kitty Hawk a handful of times to kind of help them out with their comms, but I was like, yeah, get me off this thing. I mean, that was an old ass bird. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I'm going to help you set up your comms and then I'm getting the fuck out, right?
Yeah. Pop smoke, I'm out.
But so as a sailor, I don't look at steam catapults and go, yes, that's the way to go. But he does. And it really just drives you to this question of, so did the evidence produce the conclusion or did the conclusion come first and then the evidence got recruited afterward? And I think the evidence here supports more of the latter than the former. And just the fact he's been whining about this since 2017. And even then, he was whining about it, apparently, fact check me if I need to be, before he even got briefed on the new email system. So I agree with you. I think somebody was just like, this new system, it's trash. And they weren't wrong.
Well,
it was trash at that time, but it's gotten better.
Those of us that have spent any time in the military knows that there's one thing a military member is really good at, and that is bitching and moaning and complaining. We're good at it.
About change.
About change.
Particularly about change. I think that's the one constant in the military, is that there will be change.
Right.
The only other constant is that people will whine about the change, even if they were whining for the change before that. There will always be somebody who just wants to keep it the way it was.
So one of the best lessons I was ever taught was by an old sergeant major, and I was a lieutenant at the time, and I was flummoxed because the situation that I was in, we were having a difficulty pleasing the soldiers. And he said,
It's the wrist action. You got to get the right wrist action, Robby. If you want to please the soldiers,
Right.
I mean, you gotta, you know.
At any rate, he said, "Sir, when a soldier stops bitching, he's dead." It actually is reasonably positive for morale to sort of allow a certain amount of that. So, yeah, I mean, my sense is that someone was just moaning about this, complaining about it, probably low information complaining.
Yeah.
This wasn't a technical brief. This wasn't an expert that somehow seeped into the consciousness of our esteemed POTUS. And it just became one of his things, like wind power or whatever else.
It has that same feeling to me, not just with wind power, but when he decided that he wanted to reopen Alcatraz. It seems to come to him, these ideas, or, you know, the past was so much better and we got to bring it back, and he just goes with it. I wish, as an Air Force guy, somebody would whine to him about them replacing the A-10. And honestly, as a soldier, I feel like you probably should sit in that same category, because nobody loves the A-10
Love to see
as
him, man.
much as, yeah.
Love to see him. I've got a great A-10 story, but I'm not going to share it. At any rate, once it's there, because ultimately and truthfully, you run the numbers on this, and we're not catapult experts, folks. We're not pretending to be, but I'm going to challenge you to go do your research, Google search this like we did. And what it really shows is that it is a system that has a rationale for its purpose. It has now a record of near 40,000 launches. It is progressively improving. The cost of reversing course, going back to an older technology that has its limits and is probably not going to grow into the future with us, given what David had talked about with different types of aircraft, different sizes and weights, and unmanned aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. There really is not a ton of solid evidence to go backwards on this. However, I challenge somebody to present this evidence to POTUS and see if he backs off, because my sense is low probability.
I agree. What I really love to see is him push for an executive order to fix the damn system, look for ways to improve it, to make it more operationally compatible, and try to find ways to make Steam seem like a better system.
Yeah, let's take all the money that they're going to invest in transitioning back to Steam, invest it in improving the EMALS system. And that's probably a better executive order. Although executive orders that get down into the weeds like that, I'm still...
Well, you said better, not great. If we're trying to polish a turd here, I would rather see a push to improve a system that has already been invested heavily in, that is being used, than trying to just backtrack on something that's going to cost billions of dollars.
I concur. Now, speaking of evidence and uncertainty, let's chat about Iran shooting Air Force One out of the sky.
He flew his Qatari bribe jet to Turkey
with the brand new paint scheme,
with all the new. And then I remember that they had said, "Oh, we're going to switch back to the old Air Force One and fly to," was it like Lockheath?
No, they were going to fly the new one to Lockheath to show it to the soldiers.
Okay. So we're flying the Qatari bribe jet to Lockheath to show the show.
He flew home.
Did he fly all the way home?
I believe he flew home in the original.
We
Air
were
Force
told
One.
that he flew home, and it was like, okay, whatever, but it was for quote old time's sake, flying the old one.
Right.
But the new Qatari bribe jet, which is what I will call it, went to Lockheath so that the airmen there could see it.
Because they were excited about it.
I mean, I know I'd be in line to see the Qatari bribe jet, hundreds of millions, $1 billion
No, it's $1 billion.
to me. But now we find out this week that Trump did not fly on the new Air Force One. He walked on board so everyone could see him. He then got into a food cart or like a catering cart or something, and he Taylor Swift his ass over into a military, was it like a C-17 or some military plane. He then flew with Papa Hegseth. So I assume, I don't know, and fact check me, please, but I assume Hegseth was hanging out with him in the cart. They must have been eating Doritos or something, got onto the C-17 secretly, flew to the United States.
It was Red Hot Cheetos.
Red Hot Cheeto. Yeah. See, this is why you're the colonel and I'm not. And then after they landed, moved him back onto the old Air Force One so that he could then walk off the plane. And he's the president of the United States. So if you have a credible threat towards the president of the United States, you have to take measures. And this did happen in some regard to Clinton in 2000. He had to switch planes too. It should not surprise anybody at this point, the difference, because in 2000, the press pool, the head of the press pool at that point, or the head of whatever, somebody was actually made aware of the fact that Clinton would not be on that plane because there was a credible threat. But this time, nobody told the press that they were riding on a plane that could potentially be missiled out of the sky, along with his cabinet members who were also there, with the exception of Papa Hegseth, the brave, fucking manly man, machismo guy that he is. That's the difference, was that they hid and didn't tell anybody. And I guess if that plane had been shot out of the sky, we'd be having a completely different conversation right now, right?
Yeah, so you've captured it. Bottom line, they're sitting in Turkey. They've got the Qatari bribe plane. They've got the old Air Force One. They've got another smaller craft. There was credible evidence that there was a risk. Now, I'm actually not even remotely criticizing the fact that they took steps to protect the president. It's their gig. And, you know, we have a risk assessment matrix in the Army. And the way we look at it is we look at the probability of an event and the level of mission impact. And even if it is a low probability,
Air Force does that shit too.
A low probability threat, there is, but if it is a catastrophic outcome, then we take it seriously. So I would not even remotely, I mean, in the context of this, we're talking about evidence, we're talking about changing one's opinion, et cetera, et cetera. I think they did the right thing. There was a possible threat. It would have been, in the grand scheme, a catastrophic outcome. So they took steps. Now, where it gets funny, and actually quite funny, is the level of misdirection. In the misdirection, I'm not criticizing that. It's the fact that the obvious lies from start to finish, when nothing needed to be said. Nothing had to actually be said. Didn't have to come up with a lie that it was going to be flown to England in order to let the troops see it, which didn't happen, by the way. No troops witnessed this. They didn't go for that. So that was a lie. All the lies that were generated by our POTUS were unnecessary lies, which opens you up to the funniness of him having to be smuggled into a catering van, then driven over to the other plane and smuggled in underneath I don't know what they were serving, chicken cacciatore or whatever, hot meals, you know, and the fact that there was a select few. Now, interestingly, Marco Rubio was left on the original Air Force One. He was told. He knew.
Oh, he was told?
He wasn't.
Okay, because I heard
fully
he wasn't. Okay,
No, he was
so
fully,
Marco Rubio was aware.
He was fully read in.
That
and
actually,
he stayed.
In some ways, I feel like that gives me, like, fuck Marco, in all fairness, because fuck that guy. But at the same time, I have slightly more respect for Marco Rubio than Pete Hegseth at this point. Because, I mean, you know, Pete Hegseth was like the first person to shoot his hand up to not be on the targeted plane.
Right. We're in a war. Wait, you're saying that it's not a war every day of your life. But no, now it's a war. And it's really important that I survive because, you know, I'm so critical. And if given the opportunity, had he been able to describe what he would have done, he would have said, I would have climbed out on the wing and caught a missile coming at us and redirected it by sheer strength that I get from my testosterone supplementation.
Yeah, my testosterone.
And doing my
redirect.
poor form chin up.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you go through life with a buzz, you know, you got to give him some credit there.
God knows we can attest.
All right. Do you have a prescription this week, Robby? And by the way, I did just pour a larceny small batch weeded bourbon, 92 proof. So we're going to try this as we close out. Everybody in the room gets a bit of larceny small batch, except for that person.
All right. Yeah, I do have a prescription. So First off, I want everyone to remember that Oliver Cromwell quote and use it at least once this week in some random place just to freak the people you're with out. But secondly, Americans must stop treating never changing your mind as evidence of strength. Before asking what would change someone else's mind, we should be able to name what would change our own. If the answer is nothing, your brain is no longer serving as a jury, it's joined the defense team.
Yeah, you totally stole mine, jackass. So I'm going to have to come up with a new one. Good, but I got one.
You know what? I haven't had a weeded bourbon in so long, I forgot what they tasted like. Not bad. Not bad at all.
They taste fucking delicious and wonderful. That's what they taste like.
Not bad.
Ambrosia.
Ambrosia.
Ambrosia. All right. So this week's prescription for me, because I had to change mine, was pick one belief you're absolutely certain about and try to prove yourself wrong. If you can't bring yourself to try, congratulations. You found the problem. All right, that's it. So Robby and other onlookers for our show.
We had a studio audience.
We had a studio audience. This is very exciting. Thank you so much for sticking around. ShrinkTheNation.com. Hit up our merch, hit up our Kick-Ass Arcade, and drink along with us. But more importantly, shoot us an email about the question I asked earlier. And if you don't remember the question, rewind, listen to it again, because you will certainly have a reason to send us an email.
Hey, to our tens of listeners, I don't remember the question, so I understand totally that you don't.
But you're on your third shot of bourbon, so I forgive. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so much. I'm going to cue up that music. We are out.